welcoming community. We live our message of hope, love, justice, and joy. We extend a special welcome to our visitors this morning. We're really happy that you've joined us, and we hope that you'll stop by our newcomer table after the service this morning so that we can get you any information that you'd like about our congregation. That's right out there in the lounge, just out those doors on that side. Again, welcome one and all to UU Princeton this morning. We have a few announcements. The first is that this month's Zen Practice and Dharma Talk, which was supposed to be this morning, is postponed until February 24th due to illness. So please come back on the 24th, and apologies for any inconvenience. But there's still something for you to do after worship today. Ted and I will lead a discussion on the topic of the service, which is the proposed changes to the Unitarian Universalist Association's principles and sources. You're going to hear a lot about that over the course of this morning, but stick around in Channing after the service if you'd like to have a discussion about that right after worship. Also, the Women's Alliance cordially invites you to join them on Thursday, February 15th on Zoom only for lunch and the program Getting to the Heart of the Black Maternal Health Crisis. It'll feature a speaker from the Perinatal Health Equity Initiative. Lunch and socializing will begin at noon, and then the program starts at 1 o'clock. If you look at Friday's e-happenings, which was emailed to you, you can see the Zoom link or contact the church office and we can get that to you. Also, the fellowship auction, our major fundraising event, will take place on March 2nd with online bidding from the 2nd through March 10th. This is a reminder to register your donations during this week by contacting Candace Hedberg or your auction volunteer to register that donation. If you need donation ideas, please follow the link on our website where you can find amazing and creative donation opportunities. And lastly, this coming Wednesday, the 14th, is what? Nope, it's Lent. It's Ash Wednesday, of course, the beginning of Lent. It is the day that marks the beginning of Lent. You can sign up today for our Earth Ministries 40-Day Lent for the Earth Challenge. Which 40-day environmental challenge do you think you can handle? There's a plastic bottle fast, a fast food fast, an online shopping fast, an animal product fast, all sorts of things. And then you try to hold your fast to the end of Lent, which is on March 28th. You can find more detailed information about each of these challenges and their impact, as well as how to sign up for this at the Earth Ministry table in the lobby after worship today. And now, friends, with love leading us, peace guiding us, and grace embracing us, come, let us worship together.
I might suggest, Reverend Bill, that this Wednesday is both Lent and Valentine's Day. These are the words of Martin Luther King, Jr. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that.
And let us join together in the spirit of prayer. Holy One of earth and stars and all people, thank you for this day, for these lives, for these friendships, and for love. Thank you for unexpected moments of joy and the surprise of laughter and the beauty that can sneak up upon us and catch our breath. Thank you for kindness when we are sad. Thank you for company when we are lonely. Thank you for solace when we are grieving. For the ancestors and their abiding wisdom, for the young and their growing inspiration, for those we've loved and lost who live on in our hearts of tender memory, we lift up gratitude this day and always. We pray to be your servants through acts of love and lives of justice and offerings of compassion. Let our gratitude be enlivened in the gifts we give others and the world. Let our worship of you be made manifest in our embrace of the stranger, in the care of our neighbor, and the love of our hearts given freely to a wounded world. Let our faith be more lived than proclaimed, made real in deeds of love and justice. May our faith be brought to life in blessing the lives around us. And here in the silence of this sacred space, we offer these, the prayers and meditations of our hearts. May it be so, and amen.
Almost 10 years ago, my wife Jane and I had the opportunity to learn about Islam. We were in Morocco, and we had lectures in the morning about Muslim culture, history, and theology. Then in the afternoon, we wandered in the Medina and historic sites of the city. It was a great opportunity. One of the things we learned is that for Muslims, the Prophet Muhammad is the last prophet. Allah had sent prophets before, like Abraham and Jesus, but Muhammad is the last. I wanted to ask our teacher how he knew that the Prophet Muhammad would not be followed by another in the future. But Jane cautioned me that I'd probably not be able to get a good response, probably not be able to ask that question with sufficient respect and deference. Well, she was right, so I didn't ask. This idea, though, that Allah has spoken through his prophet Muhammad and then pretty much closed the book, still haunts me. The belief is that revelation is sealed, that the holy word, the Quran, has been written, and whatever comes after is just commentary or dialogue. But the holy word has been writ. We're familiar with something close to this idea in Christianity. Early Christians debated and voted about theology for several centuries. But then somewhere around the year 400 in the Common Era, they decided what the Bible would say. Again, the idea, at least as I understand it, is that God has completed the task of giving his message. Revelation is sealed. Now, Unitarian Universalism is not a faith of sealed revelation. Ours is most definitely a faith that says revelation is open, that we continue to explore eternal questions. We keep asking the questions that matter the most. Who am I? What is my role? And just as important, what is our role as a faith community? What should we be doing here during our lives? How should we live out our faith in the world? For Unitarian Universalists, these questions come back time and again. We have no creed, no statement of beliefs that all you use must adopt. That's important because we want to preserve the freedom of belief for each one of us. But we do have values, statements not of belief, but of purpose. And that distinction is vital. These statements of purpose define our faith. They point to our role as a faith community in the world. In the bylaws of the Unitarian Universalist Association, it is Article 2 that sets out these statements of purpose. The first words of the current Article 2 are, "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote." And then the article goes on to express the current purposes, principles, and sources of our faith. Later on, Article 2 requires the UUA Board of Trustees to examine Article 2 at least every 15 years. There are two huge ideas here. One is covenant, and the other is re-examination. We don't have a creed that sets out beliefs, but we do have covenants, agreements on how we will act together, on how we will be together. A covenant is a solemn and binding agreement, more than a promise, something I will call sacred. A covenant sets out our intentions, our vows. Yes, They can and will be broken because we're human and we make mistakes. But as in our congregation's relational covenant, we include the idea that, quote, when we fall short, we forgive ourselves and others and begin again in love. That idea is fundamental to who we are. The other idea is re-examination. We must consider again the expression of our fundamental purposes. Are they still relevant? Do they still express the best of what we want our faith to be? Last year, when the Article 2 Study Commission released its preliminary report that went to the UUA's General Assembly in June, that report ended with this, and I quote, "We are continuing in the line of proposing changes that fit the times in which we live. We fully expect that one day another commission will review our work and significantly change it. We are writing this in pencil, not etching it in stone. No sealed revelation here." So, how do Unitarian Universalists want to express the purpose and values of our faith in this time? Well, we're UUs, so the way we do it is to revise the bylaws. Yes, really, that's how we set forth an updated expression. The process is multi-year. Last year, the General Assembly approved what was essentially the first draft of Article 2. That vote needed only a majority, and it easily got that. This year, the final draft needs a 2/3 majority, and many UUs are looking over the proposal and deciding whether to approve it. What are the main changes under review? Reverend Bill will describe this current proposal in his homily in a few minutes, but I want to highlight some of what we've said in the past. The earliest UUA set of principles comes from 1961, the time of the merger of Unitarians and Universalists. That first statement articulated, as the drafters said in 1961, the purposes of a free faith. There were 6 of them, and they came strongly from the background of humanism. Now, humanism was very important to Unitarians for most of the 20th century, emphasizing human rather than divine actions, depending on rational thought, the fundamental goodness of humans, and the expectation that every human will be treated equally and with respect. Coming out of World War II, there was in this statement a belief in science and in the potential of a world coming together in peace and goodwill. That said, there was also a very strong male orientation in the 1961. To me, this was a fine statement rooted in its time. The next major review of the principles took place from the late 1970s to 1985, when it was adopted in our current statement of purposes and principles, our current Article 2. Many of the leaders in that process were lay members of the UU Women's Federation, though there were certainly some men involved, including Princeton congregation's own minister, Edward Frost. 2 main ideas came to the forefront: the women's movement in the United States and the recognition of the need to care for the environment. Some ideas from the earlier version remained, of course, including the importance of the democratic process and the hope for world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. But caring for our earth and the importance of the work of every person both became strongly expressed. In my thinking about the current statement, the one we've had since 1985, there's also here an idea of spirituality. The sources that accompany the 7 principles in Article 2 express this idea most clearly. Spirituality was certainly downplayed in the 1961 version, with its emphasis on humanism and rationality. But in 1985, the very first source of our faith is this, as a source, the direct experience with that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. That sentence shows a huge amount of movement from the intellectual to the spirit, from our heads to our hearts. The text of Article 2, as it has remained essentially since 1985, is beautiful. But times change, and the fundamental statement of our faith needs to adapt to these changing times. Every reformer will find their own wisdom reformed. The changes don't need to be huge or radical. They only need to make sure our faith is still relevant, still calls out in response to the needs of our time now in 2024. And what can we say about these times? What do we need to hear in 2024? We live in a time of division and fear. Compromise is perhaps more difficult now than at any time in the last few centuries. Understanding each other and compassion for others seem to be at a low point. Empathy is hard to find. The fear of the other is worth noting. We are divided into our own sects, as we say, our own bubbles. We have our own news feeds and our own sources to understand what is happening. We started to hear phrases like alternative facts to explain our separation. Public discourse seems more and more to be divided into right and wrong. And in US politics, the libs and the MAGAs. And I am surely among those who fear the dominance of the wrong side in that competition. But what our times need most, I think, is more understanding of the other, including both the immigrant and the marginalized, but also those who disagree with us about public policy. We need more exposure to their perspective and more listening to their stories and experiences. Not so that we agree, or even that we are necessarily more easily brought into compromise. Our faith does not call us to compromise, but it does call us to listen, to understand better, to build connection, and to enlarge our community. To me, those are the needs of this time. Maybe what our new statement of values should do is to proclaim that love is at the center.
An old story tells of two brothers who live side by side on adjoining farms. One brother is married and has children. One is single. They both farm the same crops and get along very well, and each helps the other when they need it. They're good to each other. The single brother sees that they harvest about the same amount, but that his married brother has many more mouths to feed than he does. And so several times during the harvest season, he sneaks out in the middle of the night and adds a bag or two of his crop to his brother's stash on his farm. He never tells him. He just adds some extra grain for his brother to eat, to store, or to sell in the market. That way he can help his brother's family without his brother feeling like he owes him anything. Meanwhile, the married brother notices that they harvest the same amount and sell some of it and save some for down the road. But he knows that as he ages, his kids will be there to help him. Their love and labor will support him in his later years, but his brother might not have that. He needs to be able to sell and save more now to build up his resources for later on. So several times during the same harvest, he sneaks out in the middle of the night and adds a bag or two of grain to his brother's stash on his farm. That way he'll have more to work with now and later. They keep this a complete secret from each other. Their love is powerful and sustaining. It's dependable and admirable, but they don't talk about it. They just care for each other without any fanfare or applause. without one brother believing that they owe the other anything. This story is of contested origin. Some say it's from Zen Buddhism. Some say it's ancient Jewish wisdom. It's definitely universal. If I had to wager, I'd go with Jewish because that form of charity ranks highly in the levels of tzedakah, which is the structure of charitable giving in Judaism. There are 8 levels of giving. You have to give, but you can do it 8 different ways. And the worst way to give is to give begrudgingly. The best way to give is to give in a way that changes the fundamental circumstances of the person's life, to help lift them out of poverty, for example, or help them find a job or affordable housing or recovery support, or to assist in medical care. That's the highest form of giving, something that changes their lives. But the next way is to give anonymously so that no one knows you gave anything. Hence, the receiver won't feel like they owe you anything. This is exactly what both brothers did in the story, which is why I think it might be Jewish in origin. And this is important because in this theology, the one who has much owes the one who has less, not the other way around. To give is the obligation, the blessing, and the responsibility, and nothing is to be owed in return for that. The giver gives in abundance, with gratitude for being able to do so, and with no expectation of return or praise. And the only step higher than that is to do that exact same thing, except to give in a way that sets the other person up for a more comfortable and fulfilling life. In covenantal theology, this reflects the command to care for one another as the source of life cares for us, to bless the lives we can reach as life has blessed us, to be generous as we have received generously. In this dynamic, our praise and adoration of the source is made manifest in how we praise and adore the rest of creation. So psalms of praise to the heavens can be empty if they aren't accompanied by acts that bless the world around us. There's a covenant with the source to serve creation, and then there are covenants within the rest of creation to serve in alignment with shared values and traditions, rituals, histories, sacraments, stories, etc. That's where we find ourselves in denominational Unitarian Universalism today. We are one of those groups that bases our self-expression, shared spirituality, and missional purpose in the promises of covenant, not creed. No expression of rigid shared belief, but frequent, plural, and changing expressions of shared values and commitments. Plural means that there are denominational expressions of covenant, congregational ones, seminaries, advocacy groups, affinity groups, etc. Lots and lots of covenants in Unitarian Universalism. We create them collaboratively, and they result in a set of sacred promises to one another that are rooted in our shared values. That's what a covenant is for us, a sacred promise made by a defined group to live in accordance with a set of shared values. The values point to something beyond ourselves that we serve, and they also describe the relational qualities that will manifest in our shared lives. They change as communities change. Sometimes they're tweaked, sometimes they're tossed. Absolutely none are perfect, but they're usually good at reminding us of and introducing to others our shared values and how we promise to try and enliven them. The proposed new language for the purposes and covenant of the Unitarian Universalist Association places love at the center of the shared values. It is, quote, the power that holds us together, end quote, and is described as a spiritual discipline. Love is at the center of who we are. And the language doesn't get at this, but out of that center, we serve, grow, change, and bless. Love is the animating force of Unitarian Universalism. It brings us to life. It brings us together. It takes us places we'd otherwise never go. It's within us, but guides us beyond ourselves to neighbor, stranger, enemy, every other we can think of. And in this, we come to know ourselves better, for we too are the other to many more than we are neighbor, stranger, or even enemy. It's an imperfect love, to be sure, because it's in our hands and none of us are perfect. But the good news is that it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be present. Love just needs to be there, and it always is. But its strength and power to guide us is never stronger than when we name it, praise it, and follow it. The new language names love at the center of our shared values. And the 6 articulated shared values around love are interdependence, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, and justice. And there's not supposed to be an order to them. They're sort of in a circle. And each of those comes with its own more direct covenant or an expression of how we'll serve and grow out of that particular value. There are layers of covenants within the larger one, like a head of lettuce or cabbage. One good thing about this is that we'll have plenty to discern and discuss over the years, assuming this language passes. There is a lot there. The bad news is that no one will memorize it. We will still need our elevator speeches, which our promotions team will be happy to help you write on Tuesday, February 27th at 7 p.m. on Zoom. This proposed rewrite is the result of a multi-year process led by great servant leaders in our faith who've had Gaia only knows how many conversations and workshops about this with UU and UU adjacent people all over the place. As Ted said, it passed one threshold vote at the last General Assembly, which was in Pittsburgh. Go Steelers. Next year we're playing on this day. And it has to pass a second vote with a higher threshold at the coming General Assembly in June, which is all online. The first vote was overwhelmingly affirming and easily met even that higher threshold needed at this second time around. So we'll see what happens, but it's reasonable to think it has a good chance of passing. And this will be the new language of the UUA's purposes and covenant, which in some ways is usually someone's introduction to our faith or early on. The current principles and sources won't really go anywhere. They won't be excised from our history or all expressions of who we are. Those of us who've only known that language will probably keep using it, or most of it, and that's fine. The current principles and sources are an important and cherished expression of who we are for many people, even many who are voting to change it. It's in the hearts of countless UUs everywhere, and that's to be celebrated and affirmed even as we think about revising it. Two things can be true at the same time. We can appreciate the current language and be grateful for it, and we can believe it's time to change and revise it. And it will continue to guide us in a different way, maybe not from the front as much, but as part of our foundation. For love is at the center of the new proposed principles, but it's also really at the center of the current ones too. And it's at the center of the earlier iterations of who we are, of the values that unite us, and of which sacred promises we make to one another and the world. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow, we serve love by serving one another, expressing shared values that we believe will bless the entire world, and promising to one another to build communities out of that love and those values. And sometimes that's a very public process and involves a lot of collaboration and democracy at its finest. But often it's quiet and relational and on a much smaller level. It's the tenderness we show someone when they're sad, the patience we show someone when they're anxious, the time we take with someone who needs to share. It's the forgiveness we offer and that for which we ask when we've wronged someone. Love happens when the adult stops and stoops down to see the drawing of a child, and when the middle of a busy day includes a call to someone who is lonely, and when one plans, as they harvest, to share a little with someone else who might need it, as the brothers did in that story. That story ends with the two brothers running into each other in the middle of the night as they were stocking each other's food supplies. When they realize what each is doing, they embrace in the moonlight and they praise their good fortune, not so much for the harvest, but for the love of their sibling. And the story ends there usually. But if it is from the Jewish tradition, and if it is meant to reflect on tzedakah, it probably doesn't really end there, because tzedakah isn't just about giving, it's about justice and fairness too. And so together, maybe they would take that extra grain and give it to some of those who have less, just leaving it on some other stoops for them to find. Because as love caused them to care for each other, it also would cause them to reach out further. And justice would guide them in their blessings. Their blessings would stretch and stretch ever outward from that loving center. May our shared values work like that, stretching outward from love, being expressed in our ever-changing covenants, and becoming alive and powerful in our deeds and relationships. May our love and shared values leap from the page and be practiced in life. May it be so, and amen. And here at the end of our hour, we extinguish our chalice, knowing that its light remains with us until we gather again. Go forth grateful for the moments before you, the breath within you, the people among you, and the Spirit guiding you toward lives of love and kindness. And go forth knowing that you are held always and always with everyone else by that great love of no beginning and never ending. Go in peace, and amen.